Deede Keller met Erwin Howard in 1997, a man who she thought she could spend the rest of her life with. Her children had grown up and she was living a happy life as a successful real estate agent. Love could only enhance her life. At least that's what she thought. However, the marriage didn't pan out, and when the pair separated in 2003, she could never have predicted the fight that her newly estranged husband would put up against her returning to her previously peaceful life. Today we'll be discussing the case of Julia Deede Keller. Hi friends, how is everyone today? I hope you are all well. Before we get into the case, I just want to run through the usual disclaimer. We discuss true crime cases involving domestic abuse and domestic homicide on this channel, so if that's not the kind of content you were looking for, I completely understand, and thank you for stopping by. If you do stick around, I hope you consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons because it helps to push these videos out to more people, and by doing so, together we can spread awareness of the warning signs of domestic abuse that people may otherwise overlook. That is ultimately why I cover these cases. So with all that being said, let's get into it. Today's case is that of Julia Deede Keller. Julia, who was lovingly known as Deede around California's South Bay, worked for Shorewood Realtors. Deede had lived and worked in this community for many years and was a successful real estate agent. She loved her job and her clients loved her. Friends say she was a devoted rescuer of stray animals. She loved dogs and was surrounded by them at home and even in her ads for work. She really just could not say no to a pooch in need of love. Deede doted on her children, but she always had love to spare and was often giving small gifts to friends. Colleagues say Deede was a happy, loving and warm person. As much love as she had to give, she struggled to find a special someone who would love her and treasure her in return. She had a long-term relationship which ended in 1997, and not long after this, Deede met a man by the name of Erwin Howard. Erwin was a pilot and airline mechanic. He was originally from Bolivia, and Deede initially met him as a client. Soon, they began dating, and Deede had said to friends that she wouldn't consider dating anyone who didn't show that they treasured and adored her. Good for her. Erwin seemed to fit the bill, and before long, he had asked Deede to marry him. In March of 1998, she said yes, and shortly thereafter, they married. But it wasn't long, about 6 months after walking down the aisle, apparently, before Deede voiced her regrets, telling friends and family that she had married Erwin on the rebound, and she was having second thoughts. Deede knew how much her new husband loved her, and she didn't want to hurt him, so she was reluctant to end their marriage. She tried to make the marriage work, but it deteriorated until the couple eventually separated and divorced in 2003. This separation was initially seen as amicable by Deede's family and friends, but after a while they noticed that Erwin was still coming around to Deede's all the time. He started coming around a whole lot more after Deede had an accident which left her laid up for a while and not as mobile. So Erwin, under the guise of coming around to help with her 4 dogs and with bits and pieces around the house, was there all the time. Deede thought they had successfully transitioned from exes to friends. Others around her weren't so sure. They were thinking that Erwin was obsessed and extremely jealous. He didn't want the marriage to end. They thought that all that he was doing to prove his love for her. But the marriage was over, and in the summer of 2004, Deede had begun moving on from her marriage to Erwin and was dating again. She had started seeing a new man by the name of Robert Lowe, Bobby to his friends, and Deede was enjoying her time with him. However, Erwin had gotten wind of the new love interest and was not happy about this at all. His friends say that the normally mild-mannered Erwin became enraged and was cursing and swearing about Deede, proclaiming that she was cheating on him, despite the fact that they were divorced. He told his best friend, quote, "I want to make Deede hurt just as bad as she made me feel," end quote. Erwin also allegedly confided to some of his friends that he accessed Deede's email account and had followed her on dates. His friends told him he needed to stop, that that he needed to let go and move on, but he didn't. In fact, his behaviour only escalated. He ranted to anyone who would listen about Deede. Deede's son Mike, in a small town turn of events, lived just down the street from Deede's new boyfriend, and Mike called his mum one evening when he knew she was at Bobby's home. He told her he'd seen Erwin circling the block. Then, on the 30th of June 2004, Deede Keller was accosted in her home. She was in the shower when Erwin broke into her house and began yelling and screaming, calling her vile names and waving printouts he'd made of her emails that her friends had sent to her asking about her new beau. Erwin was infuriated. He pulled her from the shower and slapped her. I can't imagine how afraid she would have been. In that moment, what a vulnerable state to be in. Thinking you're safe in your own home and to have that shattered in an instant. Deede told a number of friends about this incident, and they told her that she had to go to the police, that Erwin was escalating. Her daughter tried to talk her into getting a restraining order, and Deede promised that she would have her locks changed. Erwin discussed what he'd done with friends. Yeah, he actually talked to people about this, as though he thought he had a right to be angry and violent. He has all the right in the world to be hurt, and even angry, but no one has a right to treat another person that way. No right to be violent. He went on to tell his mate that he wanted to strangle Deede that day. Erwin went so far as to call Deede's daughter, saying, "What is your mum thinking?" And Julie says she tried to brush him off, telling him it was between him and her mum and she didn't want to get involved. That was when he said, "Well, you just need to pray for her soul." This odd comment gave Julie pause, but she ultimately put it down to the fact that English was Erwin's second language. Trust your gut, people. Don't make excuses. On Thursday, the 8th of July, 2004, Deede put all the concerns about her ex-husband's crazy behaviour out of her mind because her boyfriend Bobby was taking her out to a restaurant to meet his father. She was excited and made plans with a friend for the following night to have a girly debrief so her friend could hear all about the date. Friday rolled around and Deede's friend called her, but Deede didn't call her back. She says this isn't unusual, so she tried again on the Saturday and still didn't get a return call. Her friend still wasn't all that concerned at that point. However, when she tried again on Sunday and still couldn't reach her, she began to worry. Deede's friend wasn't the only one who had plans with her on Friday. Julie, Deede's daughter, had a stopover flight and she and her mum had discussed catching up at LAX, but she didn't hear from her mum. Deede's son Mike was returning from a business trip and tried to call his mum, only to find that her voicemail was full. Yeah, that used to be a thing. Is it still a thing? It wasn't like Deede at all to have a full voicemail. So he called by her house on his way home. He entered the backyard via the gate and knew immediately something was wrong. He could see that Deede's 4 beloved dogs had been left without food or water. He said on Dateline, quote, "My mum would die of thirst before her dogs went without water." Mike called the police, and when they arrived, they noticed that even though her purse was there, her wallet was missing. When Mike spoke with Deede's closest friends, he realised that it wasn't just him who hadn't heard from his mum in 3 days. No one had heard from her since Thursday when she was preparing for her date. Deede's friend Cindy called Bobby. Bobby said that they went back to her house after dinner for a nightcap and Deede had laid down on the lounge. She was starting to drift off to sleep, so he said goodnight and let himself out. He did mention that while he was there, the dogs got a bit stirred up as though they had heard something outside, but seemed to settle quickly. He told police all this when they spoke to him and also added that he had found that his car had been keyed that night, all the way down one side. Speaking of cars, Deede's was missing. While detectives began their investigation, Deede's family and friends printed up flyers and along with law enforcement launched a massive search, looking for Deede and or her car. Detectives were trying to work out who could have had a motive to target Deede. She was worth quite a bit of money, so they looked at her children. They also spoke with Erwin, but he had an alibi for the Thursday night. He had been at work at American Airlines. He was a mechanic and had clocked in with an electronic key tag at 8 p.m. and worked all night. They were still quite suspicious though, because Erwin seemed to have jumped a flight to his native Bolivia around the time of Deede's disappearance. He was subsequently met upon landing by a State Department agent when he returned. He admitted that he and Deede were not on the best of terms, but he hadn't seen her since the incident in her bathroom. On the 15th of July, Deede's car was located on a downtown San Diego street. It had been there for at least 5 days, earning it a number of parking tickets. When the local police ran the plates, they came back to a missing person. So it was quickly called in. When the investigators opened the vehicle, they found Deede's body in the boot of the car. She was wrapped in a blanket that was covered in paw prints. Painted paw prints, not actual dog prints. Just thought I'd clarify. And this blanket was secured with packing tape, but not regular packing tape. It was a distinct red tape. Detectives noted the way that Deede had been placed in the boot of the car. It seemed she had been wrapped with care, as much as someone can wrap and care for someone they've just killed. So they believed the perpetrator knew Deede, and the fact that there was no forced entry at her home also gave the same indication. The detectives processed the car, checking thoroughly for fingerprints and DNA. They found nothing, not a fingerprint at all, not even Deede's. The tape seemed to be the only clue that had been left behind. So detectives began searching for someone with access to red duct tape. They didn't have to look far. They found tape matching that which was at the crime scene at American Airlines where Erwin worked. The problem they had was the alibi he'd given. He was at work. There were computer records showing him at work in that same hangar the night of Deede's disappearance, and that he'd worked a 10-hour shift. It turned out that the more detectives dug into that alibi, the less solid it seemed. Detectives looked closer into how the clock-in system worked and found that an employee could swipe in at the employee parking lot using a key card, then clock in inside the hangar, but they could also leave whenever they wanted by walking out the large bay doors and catching an employee shuttle back to the parking lot, and there'd be no record of them leaving. The homicide detective on the case found that on the night of Deede's date and subsequent disappearance, Erwin had used his keycard to swipe into the parking lot at 8:24 p.m, then at 10:21 p.m, and again at 1:47 a.m, which meant that he wasn't at work all night and therefore didn't have an alibi. The detectives were compiling all the evidence they could, though, to make sure they had a solid case. They'd heard from a witness who had seen a car matching Deede's Mercedes description, and this witness worked with a police sketch artist before looking at a photo lineup and identifying Erwin Howard. The police were still working the case when they received a call from one of Deede's neighbours. This was 6 months after her death. Now, this neighbour had been spoken to at the time of Deede's disappearance and murder and seemed to have nothing of value to add to their investigation. The neighbour now says she'd seen Erwin on the 30th of June, which was the day that he had accosted Deede in her bathroom. The neighbour says that Erwin told her that he was mad enough to strangle Deede. Why this person didn't give the police this information straight away is unclear. Maybe she had felt guilty for not warning Deede about the threat. Either way, the police had the information now, and this gave them enough to secure a warrant, and Erwin was soon in police custody and charged with the murder of Deede Keller. The Deputy District Attorney prepared for the case because, of course, Erwin is saying, nope, wasn't me, wasn't there, and had nothing to do with it. And the DA prepared meticulously because this was a largely circumstantial case. The prosecution's opening statement when the case went to court in the fall of 2008 was 2.5 hours long and laid out all the facts of the case. Once he was done and the court was in recess, Erwin's defense attorney went to speak with him. He had previously told his client that the prosecution only had a circumstantial case, but now he told him that they may be in trouble. Erwin responded, quote, "I need to tell you something." The defense returned to the courtroom and made a statement that stunned everyone. He got up and said, "My client killed Julia Keller, but he didn't murder her." So they were basically saying it was manslaughter and trying for a lesser charge. The DA asked to speak with Erwin Howard behind closed doors and made an offer: plead guilty to second-degree murder and be eligible for parole in 15 years. He also had to come into court, admit the act to everyone, and walk them through the events of that night. So Owen agrees. He comes into court and claims he went to Deede's that night because he wanted to talk to her, to apologise for his behaviour when he burst into her home and assaulted her. He says he went over after her new boyfriend had left and knocked on the door. Deede had let him in. He says he just wanted her to listen to him, but at some point he must have raised his voice because one of Deede's dogs started growling. He threw a pillow at the little dog and this made Deede angry. Owen says he grabbed Deede as she said, "How dare you try to hurt my dog," and slapped at him. He pulled her into a bear hug and he said he kept saying as he squeezed her, "Just listen. Please listen. I don't want to lose you. I love you. I miss you." When asked how tightly he was holding her, he sort of mumbles something about her shoulder, then his leg, and then he just repeats, "I killed her. I killed her. I killed her." He says he came back to load her into the car, planning to drive her over the border into Mexico before he thought through the logistics of crossing over and back undetected. Yeah, let's put a little bit of thought into the dismount of this murder. So he just left the car in San Diego and caught an off-duty cab back to LA. So we're thinking, yay, he took responsibility for causing Deede's death accidentally. He took responsibility for the rage, but would not admit it was intentional. So second-degree murder it was. The DA says that the family were grateful, thanking Owen for doing the right thing in taking some accountability. Deede's daughter said that even though nothing was going to bring her mum back, they had gotten the best possible outcome under the circumstances. The DA says that the family were good people. They weren't vengeful, but he then goes on to say that he thinks that the family realised, in hindsight, that Deede had not handled the breakup as well as she could have. I beg your pardon? What? Can we say victim blaming much? So the fact that she thought that she could remain friends with a man that she'd been married to and who offered to help her after she had an accident, and he took it to mean that she wanted him back, even when all the evidence pointed away from this, like her divorcing him and finding a new man, which, mind you, he found out by hacking into her email before he broke into her home and attacked her while she was naked in her bathroom. Yeah, definitely could have handled the breakup better. Maybe by having him arrested before now. I frickin' roll. I'm sorry, but no. So what? She thought he was a good person, so she's the bad guy. Sorry. Seriously, only way that she could have handled it better would have been to have him charged for home invasion and assault and reported for stalking. And let's face it, nothing fucking happens when these things are reported generally anyway. So who knows if things could have gone any differently. To add insult to injury, the 15 years that Erwin Howard was sentenced to ended up being only 10 years and 5 months. He was walking free in the beginning of 2019. Deede's family were dumbfounded by his release. They hadn't even been notified of his parole hearing, meaning only Deede's sister, Pat Sparks, had been present, and she had astonishingly spoken in favour of Erwin's parole, saying according to transcripts that she forgave him, that he's a good man, and that Deede had a hand in her own death. To that, I have no comment. It's her sister, and it's her opinion, to each their own, and that's all I've got to say. Deede's children, though, were upset at the early release and the lack of notification. They found out afterwards that they had to opt in to be notified of a parole date rather than it being automatic that they would be informed. Although they say that there really wasn't anything they could do anyway because the plea deal barred Deede's family or even law enforcement from objecting to his release when it came time for parole. In the Daily Breeze, Mike Keller said he now regrets signing the agreement, calling it Swiss cheese, and wishes the trial had gone on, saying, quote, "I don't see how a reasonable jury could not have convicted him of first-degree murder based on the amount of preparation he did to commit the crime over weeks and months," end quote. Mike Keller says he recalls prosecutors assuring him the plea deal would spare the family the pain of going through the rest of the trial, and that it was highly unlikely Irwin would ever see freedom, even with a conviction on the lesser charge. He said, quote, "We were under extreme duress at the time of the trial, so I blame ourselves for not looking a little bit more deeply at the agreement," end quote. That is tragic. To not only have lost your mum so brutally, but to feel that you had not made sure that justice was levelled to the fullest extent on the person who killed her. That's heartbreaking, and I'm sure it's really hard to live with. I hope they can find some solace and some peace. But my loves, that's all I have for you today. If you're finding this content valuable, please do all the YouTubey things, like, subscribe, share, and hit the bell so you don't lose my little channel on the interwebs. And please leave your thoughts about this case in the comments box below. As always, there's a list of resources below if the content of this case has raised any concerns for you regarding your own relationship or that of a loved one. Thanks again for being here, and until next time, please take care of yourselves and be kind to one another. Bye.